And good morning to everyone who's also joining us online today. We have a very huge hybrid crowd to talk about accelerating housing development in California. My name is Liz Sanders. I'm the Director of Communications for the California Department of Education. Very excited to welcome you all here today, and I will be turning it over to our superintendent shortly. A tiny bit of housekeeping just to make sure that we can keep everyone audible and engaged both online and in person. When our panelists are speaking, we'll ask that we'll pass our panelist mic, and that will be how we will make sure that folks in our Zoom world will hear you as well. And the podium here is also mic'd as well. Our members of the audience who are here participating with us today, when you ask us questions, we will just be making sure that we're repeating those questions as we answer them in order to make sure that everyone online can hear us and can track the conversation. Again, we really appreciate you being here with us today. We're very excited for a solution-focused conversation. And with that, I will turn it over to our Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tony Thurmond.
Thank you, Liz. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. Today, we have an important topic before us, and that is, how do we create more units of housing in the state of California? It is well documented that housing has grown out of reach for most Californians. This is, in fact, the American dream. When my grandparents came here as immigrants from places like Colombia and Jamaica and Panama and Detroit, Michigan, they had a dream, and that was to own a home. And in the 70s, my mom did purchase a home. But by today's standards, most Californians couldn't. And most Californians can't find a place that they can even afford to rent. And so we want to have a conversation about how we increase units of all kinds: home ownership, our workforce, affordable housing. We know that our state needs to address concerns around homelessness. To put it in context, as we're sitting here at the California Department of Education, there are some 240,000 homeless students, 10,000 of those students who are unaccompanied and on their own. There'll be some discussion about homelessness and supports today, but today we really want to dig down deep into how do we create more units in all areas and for all segments of our community. We want to talk about the opportunities that exist. We want to talk about barriers that must be overcome. And most importantly, we want to build ideas and strategies. We want to walk away today with strategies that we can all work together on to address the need for increasing units. Some of you heard that we announced one idea that we think could land us in the position of having 2.3 million housing units, and that is building housing on land that school districts already own. You all may have heard that our school districts own more than 150,000 acres of surplus property. 75,000 of those acres are ready for development right now. So you all should run out and start working on developing with your local school district, right? That is one strategy that we want to advance. There are tremendous opportunities. Many of you in the room and on the panel have worked with us to secure $500 million in tax credits that can be used for developing affordable housing. I sponsored legislation in 2020 that made that year the first year that there'd be $500 million in tax credits where affordable housing and educator housing for teachers and classified staff would be eligible. We've had that $500 million in tax credits every single year, including this year. But school districts aren't.
And I'm calling from Western Government University.
Someone's running out to develop some housing right now as we speak. We want that. We want that. We know by many estimates, California will need something like 2 million units just to address the housing crisis by 2030. And so we want that. We want innovation. We want to leave here today with ideas. Yeah, we recognize that while we have great expertise in the room and on the Zoom, we may have missed someone. And this is not intended to be a one and done conversation. This is not a first and only conversation, but we hope the first of many that is focused, as Liz said, on solutions. We all know the problem. We want to be focused on solutions, and we want to work towards that end. We have an incredible panel for you today, folks who I think represent the leaders, thought leaders around not just housing development, but economic development. And what do we do to promote the vitality of our great state? I'm honored that they would share their ideas with us today. One of our panelists is joining us by Zoom, and you will hear from Tia Boatman Patterson today, who is the CEO of California Community Reinvestment Corporation, a lending agency that has more than 20 years of experience in housing and community development. Tia is no stranger to this work. President Biden appointed her to serve as the Associate Director of Housing, Treasury, and Commerce in the President's Office of Management and Budget. But we know Tia in California. Tia has served as the Director of California's Housing Finance Agency, where she connected with 13,000 families to produce $4 billion in mortgages in 2020, and to preserve more than 60,000 affordable homes in a 6-year period. Tia was recently recognized in 2024 with the Housing Visionary Award at the National Housing Conference for her work in moving the needle in the right direction on affordable housing. And we're grateful to have Tia here as someone who is a well-recognized expert in the conversation of housing finance. Tia, if you can hear us, just give us a quick hello. We'll continue to see if we can get Tia mic'd and ready to roll, but I want to introduce you to the panelists who we have in the room. I'm going to work my way from right all the way down. To my immediate right is Chris Hannan, who is the president of the California State Building and Construction Trades Council. We all know that construction in California represents about more than $129 billion of the California GDP. There are 500,000 construction workers in California, 73,000 apprenticeships. I appreciate that Chris Hannan talks about apprenticeship and works with our State Apprenticeship Council. We know that there are opportunities for our students to become apprentices and to work in the construction and building trades. Our apprenticeship programs and our construction and building trades build homes, they build schools, they build infrastructure, they build hospitals and universities. They're available to help you at any time. And so we're grateful, Chris, that you would be here today, and also for the strides that the Building Trades Council has made to welcome more women, more people of color, more folks from low-income backgrounds into what I love how you call it first chance career opportunities to be in our construction building trades. In his experience, he spent 27 years as a union employee in the sprinkler fitters, Local 709, if I have that right, and was the president of our largest building trades council, Los Angeles and Orange County. We welcome you. Welcome, Mr. Hannan. To his immediate right, we have one of the finest lawyers in our state. And I invite you to not debate her or get entangled on the other side of debate, but she will be a friendly adversary if you do. But Jennifer Barrera is an amazing leader and is the president and chief executive officer of CalChamber, our statewide chamber of commerce. 13,000 members in a sector. Businesses represent more than $3 trillion of the California economy. We're talking somewhere in the neighborhood of 90% of our economy. And Ms. Barrera leads that sector and is a foremost expert on a number of issues, including employment law, labor law, and taxation, and has incredible ideas about the role that business and the chamber can play in addressing the need for more housing units in California. Please welcome Jennifer Barrera. To my far right, we have Mr. Tom Grable. Tom is the president of the Tri-Pointe Homes Group, Incorporated in Orange County in Los Angeles and Southern California. He is a veteran of housing and planning and development and engineering. It's a very long list of accomplishments, including building housing for educators, which he'll tell us about today. He leads the largest association of home builders, the California Building Industry Association, with 3,000 members. CBIA, when you think about the numbers of housing units that have been built in our state, 9 out of 10 of every unit has been built by a CBIA member. And so we're grateful for the work that you do as a leader and as a developer, and what you do in your spare time to lead the association of 3,000 members. Please welcome Mr. Tom Grable. And so that's it for our panelists. After we have some time together with our panelists, we'll be breaking out into small groups with various topics that we think will allow us to really consider the questions that need to be answered about how we move forward with more units. And remember, your homework assignment for today, I'm giving you the homework right up front. The homework assignment is that we must leave here with strategies that we can work together to build more units in the state. And we're looking all over: home ownership, workforce housing, affordable housing. I promise you, great ideas will come out today. I promise you that we may not agree on everything today, and we're not asking that. We can agree to disagree. We can be civil in how we disagree, but we should have robust conversations on every single topic of how we go about addressing the needs of those who are seeking to have housing opportunities. So I ask you to give your attention to our panelists, to be open to the ideas that they offer. If you disagree, accept that as a moment for further discussion, and we may just have to disagree, but know that everything is on the table for conversation today. And so with that, I'd like to get underway, and I'd like to start with a question to each panelist. I'd like, if you could, to ask you to set the stage for us. What's on the landscape? What are the opportunities for California as you see it? What are the opportunities for California to accelerate housing development at this time? And we'll just go right down the line, and we'll start with you, Mr. Hanna.
Thank you, Superintendent, and thank you for having the building trades as part of the discussion. We're very excited here in the state of California. Our State Building and Construction Trades Council represents over 450,000 of the very best trained men and women in construction. And we see today and the time going forward as an opportunity. And again, we can build anything you can imagine. Our membership is skilled and trained to build anything you can imagine. But on housing, we certainly have to have the will to build housing, and housing has to be built where people want to live, and there has to be employment within the vicinity of where people want to live. So we see the will is there to build housing, and right now we're building the consensus to move forward and launch what our membership is ready to do. We're ready to build. So we see this as a tremendous opportunity, and the number of partners and stakeholders that might not normally be in the room together. I think today is an example of that. So many different stakeholders in the room together, working to build that consensus to move forward. So we're extremely excited at the State Building Trades. Our membership's excited. And we're ready to go.
Thank you, Chris. Jennifer, same question. Set the stage for us. What is the opportunity for California from your perspective as it relates to expanding housing units in California?
Well, thank you so much, Superintendent. Always a pleasure to see you and to be a part of this discussion. I feel honored to be here with my colleagues on the panel, Chris and Tom. Oh, thank you. And to have this discussion, which I'll set the stage from a business economic perspective, first, of how critical this issue is. It is definitely the top issue that I hear from every business in California with regards to housing. We have a lot of opportunities here in California with our business community, despite some of the negative criticism that you may hear. We have so many assets and so many attractive reasons to come to California. But the number one challenge is finding housing for the workforce. They cannot bring people to California. They cannot expand in California if their workers do not have a place to live. Do not have a place to live, as Chris said, near the location, where they're working. They don't want to have to live and have these long commutes. And so it is a huge challenge, I will say, for every business in California not to have affordable housing for their workforce. It is a negative check mark on our list when they're evaluating whether to come to California or whether they're considering other locations. I will also say, say it is just a crisis that has reached unbelievable levels. I mean, the median house price, obviously $900,000 here in California. As the superintendent said, I'm an attorney in my background. I was thinking this morning driving in when I was coming out of law school, having a law degree, getting hired at a great law firm. I would never be able to afford a home in California, even kind of with that professional training that I received and getting paid what many would consider a very good salary. I'd never be able to. So we have to deal with this issue if we want to see our business community continue to grow, which obviously is critical to the success of our economy. And I agree with Chris in what he said. We have an opportunity here to really work with stakeholders that we may not have been able to work with in the past. It is a new kind of perspective with regards to finding those partnerships where you can move these policy issues forward where there felt like there was such tension before. We're no longer needing to talk past each other, but listening to one another and finding those areas of common agreement that we've been able to do in so many other policy issues. But this one, I would say, is most critical for the success of California. So we're thrilled to be here and a part of the conversation. And I think there's great opportunity here to really work on the policy issues and to really kind of advance this issue forward, stop talking about it, and really start addressing it.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you. Tom?
Oh, sorry. I keep.
Same
Okay.
question, from your lens, what is the opportunity, set the stage for us as it relates to building more units in California?
Well, first of all, Mr. Superintendent, thank you for having me as well, and the great panel. I mean, you've got the breadth of the construction, and the business community here represented. This is who is going to get these things done. But before I address the question directly, I'm just going to give a quick commercial, not for Tri Pointe Homes or CBIA, but rather Prop 2. You've all heard Prop 2 is now going to be on the ballot in November. That is to build more schools, which in turn also creates more jobs, certainly for the building trades especially, but also new schools in the areas that are needed. So I encourage you all to be very active in that campaign. As far as the housing topic, first off, there's a lot of discussion about the housing crisis, and the housing crisis here and the housing crisis there. We don't have a housing crisis in California. Instead, we have I'll preface that by saying that would imply that builders aren't building enough homes in order to address the need and the supply issues based upon the demand. And in actuality, if it's left up to us builders, we will, as we've continued to solve our supply chain issues, we will get workers to our job sites. And we will
Welcome to
build
Zoom.
homes.
Please press pound, then enter your meeting ID, followed by the pound.
So Zoom commercial. So we are, we're in actuality, we have so many obstacles, impediments, and roadblocks in our way to build homes on a consistent, sustainable basis that's creating this lag in us addressing the demand. And so in actuality, what we have is a housing policy crisis that's been in the works for 40 years. And that's you're not pointing the finger at one particular person or group or side of the aisle. It's everybody. It's all of us. This state has pushed back on allowing builders to supply housing to meet the needs of the market. The superintendent talked about 2.3 million homes that we're short. The year after, 1 year after the governor took office, in his State of the State address, he talked about us being the state being 3.5 million homes short of our need. And that's, that shortfall obviously is driving up, it's driving up pricing because of not having enough product to go around for the people that need them. So the HCD, Housing Community Development Department, actually knocked that down a bit to 2.5 million. Now it's 2.3 million. So, but just doing the math, let's just take 2.5. It's easy math. 357, and the governor talked about doing it in 7 years. That's 357,000 homes per year to build in California. California has never done that in our state's history in a year. In the last 70 years, since 1954, there have been 3 years only, that we've built over 300,000 homes. And I think the top is 322,000. The top years were 1986, 2005 and 1963 was the top year. Ironically, the year that my parents bought their first home that I grew up in. But it's and you look at percentage of population, that year, population in our state was about 40% of what it is today. We've been going backwards every year since. We've only had 17 years out of those 70 years. We've built over 200,000 homes. Last year, depending upon the estimates that you listen to, it's 110 to 115,000 was all that was built. Just to create equilibrium in the market, California needs to build at least 200, right around 200,000 homes, or just under 200,000 homes. So every year we don't, we are slipping further and further behind. And the reason for that is, quite frankly, it's policy. Now, I'm not talking about state policy. State policy has a lot to do with it, but also local policies. And the state right now is doing a lot of heavy lifting to, encourage local jurisdictions to allow for more housing. Some with a carrot, some with a big stick. But that's the point that we're at now. It's the number one issue, as Jennifer mentioned, in our state. It was recognized that before COVID. COVID took over the top spot for a few years there, but housing is back to the number one issue. And just one last point too, as we get into the discussion, as we're talking about this panel, one thing that the superintendent in our discussions found out was Tri Pointe Homes last 12 years, we've actually built on 4 surplus elementary school sites from start to finish. I personally did the entitlements on 2 of those sites, which means I was the project manager knocking on people's doors on a Saturday morning, telling them they were going to be building 2-story homes in back of their back fence, looking down in their backyard to their single-story 1,500 square foot home on a 6,000 square foot lot. We're going to build 2 homes in back of you. That's not how I said it, of course, but that's how it was received, because that's what was true. And so we'll talk about some of the issues that we'll have of this particulars of what it takes to actually build on a surplus school site. But that's my answer to the initial question.
Thank you to our opening comments from the panel. We'll be joined shortly in just a few minutes by Tia Boatman Patterson. She's traveling. She's got other meetings, but she was willing to jump on and talk with us about financing, something really important. We need money to cover, if we're going to get to somewhere between 110,000 units and 300,000 units, we're going to have revenue to support that. And so Tia will share some insights. Thank you for the commercial. Yes, here we are at the Department of Education. We believe in providing quality facilities for our students. And so that $10 billion on that bond measure means new construction and modernization. And so thank you for bringing that up and the work that you all have already done on building schools. But this school bond couldn't be more important. And, I love our panel because they're doers. I work with Chris and his members to build new schools, and in many communities, including low-income communities, so that our kids have state-of-the-art places to learn, and it actually does support their learning. Jennifer is the kind of business leader that I think we can work with, that we can all work together to find solutions that make sense for employers, because employers provide opportunities for our citizens. And so I think we're lucky to have such a great panel of leaders to help us think through these opportunities. Staying with opportunities, I want to stay strength-based. Staying with opportunities, I'd like to ask each panelist, if you were to just say just one thing at this time that you think, if we did in the state, whoever that we is, that could be state government, that can be builders, that can be those who work in construction, that can be businesses. What's one thing that's on your mind that if we did, that might lend itself to getting us closer to where we need to be in terms of expanding units? Who'd like to go first?
I guess I have the microphone in front of me, so
Go for it.
So, boy, that's tough to boil it down to one thing.
One thing,
like top
one
20.
thing.
But one thing I would say that on a local policy basis is having cities accountable for their general plans and their zoning that's already in place. Also recognizing through their regional housing needs assessments, through RHNA, that the sites that they are part of that general plan and the policy side of the city's business, that those RHNA numbers are real, that they're actually achievable. It's not just some shell game between properties, and there are cities that are doing exactly that. So I would say the general plan and zoning ordinances, as well as those future sites that are going to be designated for housing, have those upfront, which includes sites.
Very good. Thank you.
In addition to Tom, so I'm gonna go in addition, but I'll say my one. I just think, CEQA litigation is one of the things that we hear out there all the time, and I just think it needs to be evaluated and addressed. It is a 50-year-old law, well-intentioned. Environmental protection is super important, of course, to the business community. Our business community, California, is like no other. We definitely embrace that California spirit. We want to protect the environment, but we also want to build and be innovators and create. And so it's not that the business community is against the environment. We just think that it needs to be evaluated. After 50 years, we need to look whether or not CEQA is working as intended, whether or not it's being utilized to block housing rather than protect the environment. I can tell you we have members in the building space who have done amazing work for these master plan communities. And it's net zero communities that are going to provide housing, that have charging stations, that have dealt with fire mitigation, that have dealt with natural gas hookups and electric hookups, and are just doing amazing work. And despite all of those things, they are still being challenged under CEQA and can't move forward. And every time, again, you have delay with regards to a housing project, that increased costs, that increase ultimately the price to the consumer. So we really need to figure out the direction we're going with some of our environmental policy to make sure that we are not prohibiting development that is achieving all of our environmental goals just for the sake of prohibiting that development. So I would say CEQA reform is important.
Number 2 on my list.
So I'm going to give all the panelists a chance to talk about CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act. But I want to give Chris his one thing that you might point to that if we just did would get us where we need to go.
Sure. And to try to summarize in one thing, there is not any one thing, but I'm going to come back to consensus. You have to have, obviously you have to have land, and you have to have suitable land. If we're not building something that it has a consensus, that's a good project, that's not environmentally sound, that we don't have the workforce together to build, and we don't have the financial markets there to support, we're not going to build very much. And I think Tom's comments earlier and the superintendent's comments and Jennifer's comments, we need to build a tremendous amount of housing, and we need to have suitable locations, and we need to have consensus to be able to build at the scale that we need. So there's not one thing, but narrow it to one thing, consensus.
Thank you. Since it came up, I'd like to spend just a little bit of time on the subject of CEQA. Chris, if you don't mind, if you have thoughts about what was stated about the need for CEQA reform, what do you see, agree or disagree, what do you see as being the type of reform needed? I've been voting on housing development projects since 2005 when I was on the city council in the great city of Richmond, and CEQA review was always part of what we did. So I believe in CEQA, but is there an opportunity for some reform around CEQA? Is there a way to preserve environmental needs, but not have it be a barrier? Any thoughts, Chris?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, we have to build projects that are environmentally sound. We believe that the CEQA process, you get there, and if you're not putting in the work, so the projects we've worked on, we've worked all across the state, building trades, affiliates, worked all across the state, and the projects that are the most successful and the most well-received in communities are projects where people put in their work to talk to the community, to build support for that project, and ultimately build a project that's sound. If we get off and we bypass environmental law and environmental protections, and we're not saying that we want things in the way or being impediments, but if we bypass environmental protections, and if we're not building projects that are environmentally sound, ultimately the residents of the state of California are going to revolt against that, and ultimately we're not going to be able to sustain the level of building that we need at the levels to keep up. Not to just to catch up, but to keep up and not fall further behind. So we believe that we do need to hold the course. We need to build things. We need to put in the front end work to make sure that we're building something that's environmentally sound. And we're embracing, you know, our environmental protections and we're moving forward. So we believe that ultimately CEQA helps us reach that process.
Thank you. I want to invite you all who are interested in this conversation about CEQA reform to join one of the breakout groups today. One of the breakout groups is focused on what are opportunities, what are challenges to work through. And I believe that that will be a start of a conversation about CEQA. And perhaps we'll have follow-up conversations. This is not new. This has been discussed by policymakers, by industry leaders, and we'd like to continue that conversation. I want to move to a different question. Jennifer, I'd like to ask you to speak to the impact of the current housing crisis on our economy as it relates to jobs, as it relates to employers and employees, and anything else that you might want to opine on.
Thank you. I mean, it's having a huge impact on our economy as we've all seen kind of the headlines. I think PPIC did a report that showed, you know, this migration outside of California. One of the main driving forces was, of course, the lack of affordable housing here in California, that people were going elsewhere because they couldn't find housing. Our homelessness crisis that we're dealing with, we have 30% of the nation's homeless unhoused population. Of course, it's not the only reason. It's one of the driving reasons behind the unhoused is they can't find affordable housing. I have members in San Diego. Their workforce travels across the border every day. They live in Mexico because they can find housing there, come into California to work. That is not sustainable, of course, for everyone across the state who doesn't have that luxury of a nearby country where there's more affordable housing, but it's a reflection of how costly it is for our workers here in California to find that affordable housing. So again, our workforce, outstanding. The apprenticeship programs that Chris's team works on, our higher education system, our K through 12 education, where it all starts. This is all a huge asset to California. And we develop some of the best skilled, trained workers, I would say, in the country. And when I talk to my other counterparts in other chambers, it is the envy of a lot of other states with regards to the workforce that we have here in California. But if they can't stay here in California because they can't afford to live, then we're losing our talent and we're losing one of our competitive advantages that we have here in California. We cannot grow this economy if we cannot encourage businesses to locate here, expand here, and that is critical with regards to their workforce.
Thank you. I'd like to ask each of the panelists to speak on the issue of cost. You all referenced it in different ways, that the cost to buy a home, for example, has reached a very high level. You know, I'm not an expert in economics, but I know that demand often will drive costs, and lack of supply may factor into that. But my question is this: is there a way for costs to subside to the purchaser, to the renter, or are we simply looking at an environment where costs will just continue to rise, and we have to figure out how to help Californians raise wages, keep pace? Can costs be brought down? Any panelist that wants to, and I'd ask you all to address it in your own way.
If I might, can I go back and address CEQA just for one moment?
30 seconds.
Okay. So I'm unique in the sense that I run a home building division, but I started in this industry writing EIRs. So I know CEQA. I also know what CEQA has devolved into, as Chris pointed out. One of the school sites that we actually built homes on was the only CEQA lawsuit that I've ever had to defend successfully, but the only one. So it's pertinent to this discussion. And I'm going to be the pessimist on the panel and saying CEQA reform, it's not happening in my lifetime. We talk about it, but we've been talking about it for 30 years. My first legislative trip was in 1994. CEQA was the issue then. CEQA reform was the issue then. It hasn't gotten better, folks. It's gotten exponentially worse, more difficult, more things added on that questionably are they really environmental issues, which was the unintended consequences of adding on other things that from the original CEQA mandate. So that's how I just wanted to put that out there. As far as the cost, it's very simple. From a cost standpoint, it's supply and demand. The more we build, the more costs go down. The more we have opportunities to build, the more costs go down on the market rate side. Now, CBIA, we also represent market rate builders such as Tri Pointe Homes and other big builders, as well as medium and small builders. We also represent the affordable housing providers as well, affordable housing builders. A lot of those programs are, the costs are managed through subsidies. And so subsidizing, the cost of building those affordable housing communities definitely does, on one hand, drives down the cost on a project level, but you're also putting government dollars, spreading it across and putting more dollars into the construction system. So I mean, that's more of a debate that we could have, and there's definitely two sides of that issue that can be effectively prosecuted. However, the fact is, the more homes that we build and the more opportunities that we have to build homes to satisfy the demand, costs go down exponentially that way.
Thank you.
I will just say, I agree. One of our member companies has always said that the housing issue is a supply issue, that we need to build more supply. And so I agree with that. The more you build, obviously, the more competitive with pricing. But I think you need to look at it from a broader policy perspective than just housing. For housing, you need energy. For housing, you need water. For housing, you need insurance to cover the mortgage. If Tia, you know what I mean, is joining us with the financing perspective, and we have issues going on in all of those policy discussions right now. How are we transitioning to a clean energy grid, basically here in California, and what is the cost that's reflected on our energy bills? And how do you build out that infrastructure so you can connect to our grid? All going on right now. And Chris probably can speak to that as well with building out the infrastructure. Our water policy, you have to have a water source nearby where you can access those water. Insurance. You have to have insurance. We're going through an insurance crisis where we're having a lot of our main insurers leaving California, and people are struggling to find affordable insurance. So when we look at housing, we have to kind of address broader policy than just the supply issue, which is critical. I would say step number one, but then we have to look at the broader policy, because California, cost of housing is really high, but cost of everything else is really high. And so we have to really kind of address it holistically. And on to the wages, we're always in that debate with regards to increasing the minimum wage, the living wage rate, but there is no wage rate that I think you could get to that could allow you to afford a $900,000 home here in California. So I think why that issue is important, and I know it's a discussion that we always have, we really have to start addressing the cost holistically to drive down that price before we can have a discussion about what a livable minimum wage looks like for affordable living here in California.
Thank you. Chris, your perspective?
Yeah, and it's tough. There's not any one aspect that's gonna affect cost. Yes, we need to build more. It is a supply issue, but we need to have more options also. We need to have options for people to live where they work. We need to have options for people to live where they want to live. Not everybody wants to live in the same style of housing, and we need to build different options for people. We need to build different size units or housing, whether it be multifamily or single family. We do need to build affordable, and we need to be intentional about building affordable. But when we build affordable and we ask a development to include a certain percentage of affordable units without providing funding, it's that cost is simply shifted across all of the market rate units, also pushing up the cost for those that are still able to afford in the market rate. So when we're talking about building affordable, which we need, and we need to be intentional, we need to have funding, whether it be additional tax credits, whether it be bonds. We need to have funding. By simply requiring a developer to include a higher percentage of affordable units, it's not that we don't need those affordable units. Yes, we do. But shifting the cost to the market rate units makes the problem worse. And then also we need different options to deliver those affordable units. So if you are going to put a certain amount of percentage of affordable units within a development, you need to give the developer as much flexibility as possible. We need inclusive communities, so we need diverse communities. You can't have, only wealthy and the extreme other end of the spectrum living in different areas. We need healthy communities where everyone lives together, where we have diverse communities. But, you know, having a unit of housing delivered, it needs to be able to be delivered in the most affordable nature. If someone chooses to live in a more lavish and they're putting their money towards that, you know, fine, that's people's choices. But when we deliver housing, we also have to deliver affordable options for everybody. Workforce needs to be able to afford where they live. You know, everybody won't take that choice, but they need to have options of affordability where they live. And again, we need to come together and provide the funding and the financing needs to, you know, for affordable housing as well. And that should greater include home ownership as well.
I love all the perspectives that our panelists are giving us. We're going to bring Tia in just a moment, but I do want to appreciate the conversation about supply and demand, and also the diversity of the types of housing that might build. All of these things are essential components of the conversation. As a post note to our morning's conversation about CEQA, I want to push you, Tom. I want to push us on the issue of Tom just issued a challenge to us. Can we get reasonable balance reform on CEQA during his lifetime? That's how I heard it. I heard it.
I'm older than I look.
Well, I heard it as a challenge that we should accept. And I'm a very hopeful person. I have hope for many reasons, including I know for a fact that Tom is a professional musician who plays guitar, and you can see him at the House of Blues. And just this year, we were able to provide $1 billion of funding for arts and music education for every student in our state, not just one year, but every year. I know that we can do this. And so we're going to put a pin in that for now, but we're going to accept that challenge and come back to it in subsequent conversations. Let's welcome Tia Boatman Patterson into the conversation. Again, Tia is the CEO of the California Community Reinvestment Corporation, longtime leader in this conversation, has led many state agencies and efforts. Tia, thank you for joining us, and we welcome you to share any perspective that you might. You know, we started with the conversation about what's the landscape look like in terms of opportunity for California. We followed that up with what do we need to do? What's one thing that we need to do or could do that moves us in the right direction? From there, we've kind of branched off onto various related points. We welcome you to opine on anything that might be on your mind. Welcome, Tia. Tia, I think we need a second to get your audio.
Okay, can you hear me now?
We hear you. Welcome.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me, Superintendent Thurmond. I wish I had been able to join earlier to hear all of the wonderful conversation that I got the tail end of. I do see a couple of folks over there in the CDE room that look very familiar, so I'm going to give a shout out to some of my former colleagues. Hi, Mark. Is that Ben over there in the corner? I'm not sure, but I do see Mark. Big picture, you said one thing. Superintendent, I must beg to differ, but there is not one thing. And I think the governor has said this before, the treasurer has said this before, you have said this before, sir. It is an all of the above approach. There is not one thing that we can do that is going to help with this affordable housing crisis. It is largely a supply issue. We do not have enough housing at the affordability levels we need to serve our population. So when you think about affordable housing and how we finance affordable housing, I do believe that there are some system changes that we need that will increase the supply at the affordability levels we need. But it's not just one type of housing. I think one of the speakers may have mentioned it is a variety of housing types. We should be supporting affordable housing from homeless shelters to home ownership. And right now, our affordable housing finance system does not support that array of housing types, what I call in proportion to the unmet need. We will focus on a particular population, we will incentivize a particular housing type, but we do not look at our holistic system to fund in proportion to the unmet need. And we have to do it that way because all ships and all boats rise. When you're funding one particular housing type, or you're fighting with one another as to whether it should be permanent supportive housing or home ownership, you're not meeting the needs of the state of California. And one of the unintended consequences we saw with the elimination of redevelopment, which was putting in about $1 billion a year, was that redevelopment funding that was for low-income housing supported every housing type, literally from homeless shelters to entry-level home ownership. And because they were statutorily required to put their funding in proportion to the unmet need, they were able to tie how those dollars were spent to actual regional housing needs, housing elements, and plans for housing. And so since we no longer have that statutory framework, we have local governments actually putting the dollars to the need, you're missing the boat. So what we're doing is we're seeing housing policy be made kind of piecemeal. We see the state of California sometimes picking individual projects as opposed to looking at things holistically and looking to finance things in proportion to what the unmet need is. And what happens, in my belief, is that what we end up getting is socially engineering what we see out on the street, because developers will then follow the money, specifically affordable housing developers. You had one panelist speak to the for market rate developers can't be bearing all of these costs. The issue is that if you look at the affordable housing finance system and the low-income housing tax credits that are allocated to the state of California from the federal government, that is probably about $100 million a year on the 9% side. And then we have an unlimited amount depending on how much private activity bonds we put in on the 4% side. That entire system has never, in the history of that system, created or preserved more than 25,000 units, ever. So that system is only big enough to support on an annual basis the creation or preservation of a limited number of units. You do not, $25,000 a unit is not moving the needle one bit. So you need market rate developers to do their share, whether it's in inclusionary housing and variety types of whatever that looks like, but communities do need a variety of housing types. And so how do we all come together and stop fighting over a piece of pie, but bring a dish to the table? Because it really is going to take an all of the above approach. It is going to take market rate developers. It is going to take affordable housing developers. It is going to take for-profit affordable and nonprofit affordable. But what we need to do as the state of California is developers need developer certainty and assistance in mitigating or deleveraging risk. So how does the state of California step in to do those things so that we can increase production, whether it is in the market rate side and including in affordable housing units and affordable housing types into that market rate development, or on the affordable housing side by bringing in additional resources to complement the resources that we already have. We need to be thinking about this holistically and not on a piecemeal basis. So I have some issues with how we have managed our affordable housing finance system. So that's my big picture. I know one of the things you wanted to talk about is the report that was put out on for the CDE on surplus properties, on LEE, LDE, local educational development, teacher-owned sites or school sites. I believe, and weigh in here, Superintendent, the number of acres that were available to do housing. But that was one of the things we wanted to perhaps touch base about too, some innovative financing ways where we can complement the system as opposed to all fighting over that, just those tax credits that are there right now.
Yeah, that's amazing. We do want to talk about that. We have a breakout group that is focused just on the subject of how to move those 75,000 acres of land already owned and ready for development. We do have that group. We were very interested in your thoughts about the financing. So far, there's only been talk about using bond measures and drawing down on state tax credits, but you point out that it needs to be a very broad mix of ways to cover the cost. In an amazing way, you, in just one statement, touched on so many of the themes that we've been talking about this morning. We talked about RENA numbers and what local municipalities do around planning. You touched on that. We talked about supply and demand. You touched on that. And we talked about the diversity of housing mix that must be developed as well. You touched on that. You're a psychic and a genius. And so we've got two brilliant lawyers here, another lawyer, and Tia as well. We're really getting to the time where we wanted to transition into some smaller breakout group discussions. But what I'd like to do is invite our panelists to just give us 1 minute of a final thought. If there's something that you wish that you'd said that you hadn't said that you want to close with, or if you want to touch on where Tia just moved us on the role of government in this process, we invite you to give us your closing thoughts. You've been an amazing panel, and we thank you and just want to give you a chance for any closing thoughts that you'd like to provide. Who'd like to start? Who's got the mic?
You go ahead, Chris. Yeah.
I'll start, and this is back to the students and back to our membership. The students that at whatever level of education they're in today, they need to see a future. And when you're building, and specifically our partnerships with school districts on CTE, even our apprenticeship programs, we have partnerships with educational agencies taking the lead on administration for the training of our workforce. We need to be able to see a place in our communities. Students need to be able to see a place in their communities. When we invest in our communities, when everybody is involved in building that community, and our members are doing the physical work of building those communities, our membership has to represent the communities we're building in, and those students need to see a place for them in that community in the future. So that includes affordability, that includes opportunities, and want to close on the building of the consensus. And we represent the workforce, and we want our workforce to be representative of the communities we're building in. And we want to partner with all of the stakeholders to build at that level we need to bring the pricing down and all the options that we deserve.
Thank you, Chris.
I will build off the consensus idea. I agree that the only way in which we're going to be able to move this needle is if we bring all stakeholders together and actually have these conversations of what everybody can contribute to that discussion. I will take that challenge on the CEQA reform and say that I absolutely think it has to be something that's dealt with, but it's a part of the certainty that I think Tia talked about. When you have private developers, builders in the space, they thrive, any business thrives on being able to predict certainty with regards to their investments. And if they have that certainty, then you will see an increase. Obviously, if we remove some of these impediments out of the way that create the uncertainty and the cost driver, you will see that supply increase. But I agree with Chris. It's got to be consensus. You have to bring all of these stakeholders together to find a better way, because we know the current way is not working. So I'm optimistic, like the superintendent, and I think we have a great opportunity here.
Thank you. Tom?
Well, Superintendent, thank you for rising to the challenge. Intent, check that box. The intent was actually to put a challenge out there, because CEQA is a monumental hill to climb, and many bodies will die there in order to actually push over the top. So I am optimistic, though, that we have the right people in the room that are now talking, and that's statewide. That's at the local level. It's also here up in Sacramento, which is why it's my privilege to be able to chair the CBIA and come up to the Capitol about once a month now, and spend a day and talk with the stakeholders up here, but at the local level as well. And we do that. I would be remiss if I didn't do my NASCAR speech too, and that is I'm the division president for the 5th largest builder in Southern California, Tri Pointe Homes. 15 years ago, rather, we were a startup company. We're now one of the largest builders in the United States, publicly traded. So we're one of the big builders, as they're called. However, we are part of an association that truly believes, and it's part of our moniker, is housing for all. So as I said, it's not only market rate housing. And when we talk about market rate housing that is affordable, we refer to it as attainable, because those are homes that we're selling for people, first time buyers. And we do have homes that are in the $500,000 and $600,000 range. It's not all nine. That was the median. So we do have homes in places like the Inland Empire and North LA County, places like that are still attainable. Although that's challenging, especially with interest rates rising as rapidly as they have. That's a whole nother topic. So I won't go there, but the one thing that I think on a policy level, from a school standpoint, to really activate and program those available acres, start working with the jurisdictions that the school district resides in. And we know one of the things that might be considered is putting it together a residential overlay, on potentially or surplus school sites, because that's going to provide that certainty and consistency that builders and developers all just absolutely are starved for. That's one of the impediments for a lot of builders to build on school sites. It is in the top 3. It's probably number 2 most difficult entitlement to do. Golf courses are number 1 for a variety of reasons, but school sites are number 2 because they're surrounded by a neighborhood. And as soon as someone like me back in the day knocks on their door on a Saturday morning or a Thursday afternoon or evening and tells them that what's going to happen over their back fence, it riles people up and people are energized. And our job as the developer or the builder in that case is not to gain community support. My experience is when people support a project, they'd rather sit home and watch TV on Tuesday night instead of going to the council meeting. I mean, that's just, and also too, not go up against their energized neighbors. So our job actually is to neutralize opposition. And to do that, there's a variety of ways to do that. And we've been able to master that at Tri Pointe Homes. The last thing in summary is just remembering who we build homes for. We build homes for families, and we build homes for singles and move down and active adults. We build homes for the people that are going to reside in them. And for us, it's a noble occupation. It's a noble industry. What we do is important. It's a privilege to do because we provide that space where people lay their heads down at night and where they get up in the morning and create the walls they live their lives in. That is super important. That is one of the most important things of all of our lives. We are all products of where we grew up, where we live now, and every place in between. And it's all based upon where we lived in a home. And so what we do is vital and needs to be recognized and revered in that respect. And I think we are starting to turn the wheel on that. So I'm hopeful that within the next 30 years, that hopefully something can be done to create a policy pathway to getting more housing built to meet the needs.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Chuck.
Mr. Superintendent.
Thank you. Tia, final word.
Having a comprehensive approach and plan. Oftentimes we will focus on what we think the problem is, as opposed to taking a step back and holistically identifying the problem and then looking for ways in which we can approach the solution. We all come at it from a financing perspective, and because I'm a financing person, I'm going to tell you all, take a step back. Not just about the financing, the processes that we put in place, the ease that the state of California can bring to development. We talked about the surplus sites. As the state of California come in with that residential overlay and said, these are the developable sites at these densities consistent with the RHNA, consistent with the housing element, and it's by right, period. So there are things in which we can do from a systemic process that will then bring in more private capital, so the state and local government doesn't always have to subsidize it. A lot of times the subsidies we're bringing in is so that we can go do that community engagement, or so that we can fight the CEQA lawsuits, or so that we can pay for the financing for 15 million different layers of public subsidy. And I say layers, not leverage, because that's not leverage when you're not bringing in private capital. But let's think of this holistically from an operations, process, planning, and then looking for the financing that could come in to help underlie that. But a lot of times we do it backwards. We go after the money first and then go after how we're going to make it all work together, which means we're not providing gap financing. We are just putting in a whole lot of money to then go after a project. And so I want us to rethink about how we're approaching this systemically. And this deals with the homeless issue as well. A lot of the problem we're having with homeless is that the systems don't coordinate and work with one another. And so if we take a step back and think of the housing continuum as a system and an approach that is going to make that system work better, I think we'll have a different way of viewing this.
Thank you, Tia. You know, I don't know about you, but I have been I feel rewarded by our panel. They've really laid out a vision for how we can tackle one of the biggest challenges that we face in the state of California, making sure that everyone can afford to have a home, buy a home, rent a place, and be on a path to home ownership or to support our workforce. Every single one of our panelists has talked about what it will take for interest holders to work together across sectors, even when there's disagreement about how we do it, and that we have a plan. And you've spoken to the role that government can play as a facilitator and setting good conditions. Certainly government cannot do it alone, but in partnership with all of these sector leaders and others and all of you, we can create the opportunity to keep the California dream alive for our 40 million residents. And so with all that said, I don't want this to be a one and done. So raise your right hand. I'm going to swear you in right now. You're now a part of helping government in its way how we move this work forward. Not easy, long term, but certainly the reward is worth it for Californians. And so can we show our appreciation for this incredible panel? You all know me, and so you know I'm going to keep asking and asking and asking, whether it's in a formal advisory role or informal, that you share your expertise and talents to help us get there, and we're grateful for that. I want to bring up our great communications director, Liz Sanders, who's going to help us to think through the next part of today's conversation. Please welcome her as she comes.
Thank you very much, Superintendent. And again, we do want to make sure that we are all able to have discussions about the core issues here, make sure that we can identify some really important next steps. So there are 3 breakouts that we will be shifting into. You can see here on the screen if you're here with us in person. Breakout 1 will be focused on accelerating funding and partnership. That will be in room 1108 downstairs in our media room. There are ushers who will help guide you there. Breakout 2 is about creating opportunities and removing barriers to development. That will also be on the first floor in room 1801, and we will also have signage and ushers to help you find your way. Breakout 3 will be in this room, considerations for school districts, diving into the how-to of educator housing. We know we have a lot of enthusiasm for that one amongst our folks representing LEAs here. And these are all hybrid breakouts. So for everyone who is on Zoom, you will also have the opportunity to select your breakout and join a similar hybrid space where you will be online but able to have conversation with folks who are here in person. The breakouts will be starting at noon. So we've got a little bit of a humanity break, both for our folks online and our folks here in person. We have some refreshments and water in the lobby. For our media who have joined us, thank you so much for being with us here this morning. We will have media availability starting at 11:45 in just a moment. And a big thank you to everyone who is sharing questions in the chat on Zoom. We are tracking those and we will follow up with you. So thank you again for the very specific questions that are helping us further this conversation. Afternoon. We're going to try that one more time for our in-person folks. Good afternoon. Thank you. You always know it's a room full of educators when there's a lot of buzz and it's hard to get back together. There have been so many fantastic ideas and discussions that we've heard throughout today. I'm going to hand it back over to our state superintendent to convene an ending conversation. Thank you so much.
Hey, good afternoon. We started in the morning. Here we are in the afternoon, and you all came back. we're not going to hold you long, but we thank you for really being on this journey in this conversation about doing this. We thought we might just hear a few highlights from anyone who wanted to share what happened in your breakout group, something that was either interesting, gave you hope or joy, maybe gave you heartburn, and then we might be able to help you get it over the hump in the future. But we thought that we'd ask for hearing from you all. How many, if you were in the group that focused on funding, how to get more funding, is there anyone who wants to share something that a highlight of some sort from that group? Okay, I'm going to call on Richard Barrera, who facilitated the conversation. If you want to give us a highlight.
Where's all the shyness coming from all of a sudden? I thought there were some really important points that were made. One of which was that we've got a kind of a joint challenge in projects that are designed the way the system is designed in terms of available public subsidy, which is largely for people at the lower end of the AMI scale. But even with that, we're leaving federal money on the table because we need to come up with that gap financing. And if we don't come up with that gap financing, then it's, federal tax credits, we're leaving them on the table. And then there was a lot of conversation about what you describe as the missing middle, that 80 to 120, which, frankly, as we know, is basically our teaching force, but it's also our police officers, our firefighters, everybody else, that there aren't very clear public subsidies available to address that range of people, but there are a lot of ideas that are generated about, for instance, tax abatement on projects that school districts retain ownership or the public agency retains ownership, that can open up a possibility that doesn't divert property taxes away from funding schools and funding other things, but allows property that currently is actually not paying taxes to be a source of housing for people in that missing middle, and that tax abatement could really help. And, my brother here, Jose, from the city of National City, we talked a lot about how the goals of city governments meeting their housing requirements are perfectly aligned to school districts starting to do this. And so let's not work in silos. Let's bring, our local agencies together to address this together. Is that fair from my quiet group number one?
Looks like they're all smiling. Thank you. Richard is our senior policy advisor, and in his spare time, he's also a school board member at San Diego Unified, a district that has been very active in the conversation around building housing, including for educators. Thank you for that, Richard. If there's anyone who was in the group about the proposal to use the surplus property that exists for school districts to build educator housing that wants to provide a highlight, we welcome you. I'm scanning, I'm looking. Anyone? Seeing none. Let's hear from Abel Guillen, who was a deputy superintendent here at the Department of Education, who facilitated that group to provide us some highlights.
Thank you, Superintendent, and thank you again for your leadership. Our group, we had a robust discussion with panelists from CSBA, from UC Berkeley and UCLA. And one of the interesting things that came out, we had a lot of interesting dialogue, but one thing that stood out for me was perhaps how the state can be a partner is having DGS do the permitting for local school districts, because school districts already know DSA. What did I say? DGS, I'm sorry, DSA, the Division of State Architect, to help streamline the permitting process, because we know that every jurisdiction is different, but every school district is already used to working with DSA on their building projects. So that was an interesting conversation to have, and we did make note of that. Another piece was a tool that can be used is actually myths versus facts for school board members, even approaching the conversation. What are some tools, some actual tools that districts can use? There are, some things out there that say, well, this is going to drain the general fund. Nobody wants to do that, right? And so how do we get clarity of information out there on our different models to put that out there? So thank you, panelists, and thank you for being part of the conversation, Group 3.
Thank you very much. Quick question, it came up in one of the groups, does the Division of State Architect also approve when a school district is building a residential project? Is that a requirement?
Well, DSA, if you ask them, they have absolute authority over our school district projects. So, I have a history with building, on a district office where I had my choice of DSA or the city entity. Because there's no students in there, I don't have to worry about DSA. And the consensus from a school district, we would rather go with who we know. We have relationships with DSA.
I'm on both sides. I've been a city council member and a school board member, but I want whatever is going to be most efficient. Is there anyone here from the Department of State Architect today?
Our outlook's a little bit different. You know, we have a great relationship with our city and our city officials. And we like the flexibility of on a per project basis, seeing what project is more beneficial for DSA. So we would like that flexibility.
You both like the choice.
Yeah.
But the way you phrased your first response made it sound like there may need to be some clarity for those times when maybe DSA will feel like it is in their purview and maybe there's not agreement. Let me say it that way.
Well, DSA has challenges right now with their inspectors. So until they figure out how to get inspectors for all of our school projects, I don't know if they're going to be able to meet the need for all of our housing projects.
Got it. I don't want to speak for the Division of State Architect, but is there anyone here from DSA today? Either they are not, or they're just not going to raise their hand. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
But the way I understand it is that if a project has public monies in it, so if you have GEO bond monies in it, then they have a role in it. It may be just for ADA, and you may be able to go through your local building authority, your city or your county. But DSA wants to take a shot at it if there's public money. I will say it kind of depends on who your public agency is in terms of the relationship you have with them and how expeditious their permit processing is in comparison to DSA. We have a great relationship with DSA, and their plan check is very predictable. And it's very certain. Whereas with our local building agency, our cities, sometimes they're not as predictable. There's more rounds of plan check and there's more uncertainty in the process. I know in San Diego, the city of San Diego, that's improving. I'll say a positive thing about it. It's improving.
This is a public meeting.
I know for a fact, we have a lot of council members in the room and others who are working hard to create
Yes.
more predictability.
Yes.
At the
So-
local level.
Yeah, so the other thing to think about though too is DSA is used to looking at buildings and permitting them to a higher standard of seismic resistivity, of fire life safety, and their ADA compliance is more stringent than a commercial building or a residential building. So they need to, if we were to look at DSA as a permitting agency, we'd probably want to recalibrate their oversight or the way they look at the margins of safety and seismic resistivity in residential construction to align with how cities do, because otherwise building costs will go up dramatically in terms of the cost of the structure itself.
Are there any school districts in the room or on the Zoom who've built educator housing? And if you are, did you use DSA or did you use the local government agency?
We did housing. We used the local government agency and we found it pretty tedious. The other thing the local government agency does, and rightfully so, is they treat us as if we're just a developer.
Mhm.
So they recover their costs and also augment their own infrastructure at the cost of the developer. We don't feel that LEAs should be treated as developers when we're developing housing for our own staff. And so in working with DSA, we've always, LEAs have a long tradition of working with DSA, and they're an entity that we know their structure, and we feel that it works very well for the LEAs to work that way. If we're developing something and even if they're requiring a better standard for it, at least we're looking at a development that we know that is built to that standard.
So what I heard is that in some jurisdictions, if the school district is building educator housing, they require you to pay developer fees like any other developer. And you don't think that that should be the case. I heard that loud and clear. And, you know, this is really interesting. I think it gives us some things to add to the list, the many things that are on the list as we pursue different ideas, including, can this state build 2 million housing units for educators? And so the questions about, will it be DSA or the local agency? So we thank you for raising that. Thank you for your group, Abel, and for your group, Richard. We'll look forward to the list of funding recommendations that are available. And I'm getting an announcement that I missed someone. Yes.
Just wanted to say, for those of you who are interested in working with your local jurisdiction, AB, I think 306 actually, which passed in 22, allowed you to have the option for housing, even if it's on school property. You have the option to go with your local or with DSA, but it's purely at your discretion.
How many school districts represented in the room today that have built housing, just by show of hands? Quite a few. How many developers who partnered with the district as developer in the room? Raise show of hand. That is awesome. And we have 100 some other folks who stayed on by Zoom. We're grateful for all of 100 of the 400 who joined today. We're grateful that they have remained on. I want to remind everyone that this is not intended to be a one-time conversation. As you all pointed out, there are many things that need to be resolved. We want to remind you that we would like you to fill these forms out so that we can continue the conversation with you and help you get set up into some groups where we can have, more, as Derek pointed out earlier, more conversations that are a little bit deeper into the weeds about the specifics about how to move the policy. And so before we make our final comments, anyone who was a part of the group that looked at opportunities and challenges to build more units, want to share any highlights? I'm looking to see who was in that room today. If anybody wants to share, everyone's being so shy. Oh, hey, we got a volunteer. A round of applause, everyone, for Karen.
Thank you. Yeah, I thought it was particularly interesting how we emphasized the continuum of different options that we could do. So anything all the way from ADUs to home ownership opportunities. I thought that was a particular highlight. I think another one that I wanted to emphasize was the idea of mixing both market rate and affordable to be able to finance these programs so that it's not as much of a cost and not as much of a burden on the districts. I think that's an interesting and innovative way that we can continue to finance that. And also just looking at the broader climate around it, right? So looking at ideas about how we can, like you were saying, streamline permits, how we can continue to finance in new ways.
Wow, that was so much better than anything that I would have said. And I didn't have to call on myself. Karen, excellent summation. Thank you so much. It's a really great day. And we're looking forward to doing the work together to move forward, to figure out how to address all these needs that came up today. I want to thank so many at the Department of Education who helped this conversation to happen. Our facilities team, our tech support team, the communications team under Liz Sanders, our executive staff administration team, Jenna Anderson and Amma, who were in the room. They're busy doing more. Thank you for all that you've done. Our government affairs team under the direction of Susan Little. Thank you, Drs. Garcia and Drs. Torres. You met the facilitators who also have been working on this. We intend to keep doing this. Mary Nicely, our co-chief deputy superintendent, Nancy Portillo, our other co-chief deputy superintendent. As you can see, we're all in on this. And Karen, who's here, who's been working on our educator recruitment, and in her spare time, she's a school board member thinking about building affordable housing. We're excited to work with you all on this, and we're looking forward to great things. So we are adjourned. We are grateful. We thank you and look forward to the great work we'll do together. Thank you so much for today.